Right, here I am live. Good afternoon. You'll probably see that I've got red marks here. The reason being, I am allergic to my beard. Every time I don't shave for 3 or 4 days, it gets really itchy and turns into a rash. So unless I stay a good, clean gentleman and shave every day, I end up like this. But anyway, if you can tear your eyes away from this hideous face, I'm just going to share with you today a little bit about Halloween and its connection with the Fool. Now, what exactly is the Fool? Start with that. In various traditions throughout the world, throughout history, there has been a Lord of Misrule, a cosmic joker, something like Loki in the Norse tradition, or Mr. Punch in the Western tradition, various names that they've had. And the general idea is, I mean, even the Romans did it. They had a figure that was a figure of fun, a joker, a jester, that at Saturnalia would dress up in this strange kind of weird costume. And it would sometimes supposed to be a slave, not a member of the family, even in a Roman household. And they would be given the authority to do whatever they wanted for the one day of Saturnalia. They were the Fool. They were outside law and order of anything else. I don't think it went as far as they went around killing people, but they could certainly cause mischief. And the idea was, and this happened in many different traditions, certain times of the year, like generally speaking, when coming up to the winter time, when the fruits of nature were not going to be available to everybody, and people were going to have to rely on what was stored away and hunting and basically the survival throughout winter. And they wanted to make sure that negative attitudes, negative forces that were about them and cosmic forces that could cause problems were dealt with. That, in other words, they were given good luck as opposed to bad luck, because a lot of surviving through hard times has got to do with luck. And they believe that maybe they could change luck. And the character that they associated with being outside any kind of law and order or rules, or beyond gods, beyond demons, outside the whole structure of things, was the Fool. Now, in ancient Egyptian times, it was a creature called Ani. And he was also known as the ape of Thoth, because he was supposed to be associated with the god of learning, Thoth. But he had his own agenda. And basically that was, he could do whatever he wanted. He was a baboon-headed god who wore a strange costume made from leaves. And he was supposed to have had the power to literally spin the wheel of fortune, to change luck, sometimes from good to better, sometimes from better to worse. And it was somebody that was a difficult character to control with just prayers or sacrifices or anything else, because it wouldn't necessarily keep to any kind of bargains. Okay, so let's come to the Fool in European tradition. Going back to Anglo-Saxon times, we know that what was happening is that they were the people, even though they were nominally Christian, they were also carrying out all sorts of pre-Christian, both Anglo-Saxon and Celtic practices, pagan practices. I mean, and the reason being is when the church first came to Britain and first established itself among the Anglo-Saxons, they basically said, the church said, look, you can carry on worshipping your own gods, just call them saints. You can carry on doing what you did and go to the same shrines that you use, but we build a church there. And they basically absorbed other religions in that way. So a lot of the earlier pagan ideas used to remain. Now, one of these was the tradition of when the harvest was done, they had to, if you like, satisfy, they had to appease the Fool, because when winter came, then the Fool could cause all sorts of trouble. In fact, the Fool had lots of different aspects. He could come as Jack Frost. That's the one who brings a frost, not just the idea that they had in Victorian times of Jack Frost makes little patterns of ice on the window. No, Jack Frost destroyed people. They froze to death. The animals that people hunted in the winter were frozen to death by Jack Frost. And in fact, Jack tended to be another name they used for the fool. In London, when there was a character going around in Victorian times, frightening people, seemingly had supernatural powers to leap over walls, they called him Spring-Heeled Jack. They called Jack the Ripper, before he called himself that, supposedly in a letter he wrote to a newspaper, because he was thought to be outside the law. The name Jack came in. Jack of the Green. There was many other names for this fool character. Now, ultimately, what would happen is, if you have seen, and you probably have, many people have seen the film The Wicker Man. Well, in The Wicker Man, what happens is that Edward Woodward, he goes to this island where they're still practicing pagan religion. And the idea is that they've lured him there, so they're going to sacrifice him. And they get him ultimately to dress up in a fool outfit and follow this procession through the villages and out into the countryside, where eventually they decide they burn him as a sacrifice, so that their hope that their crops are going to improve. That was done on Beltane, which is like the night before May Day, or was it May Day morning? Anyway, at that time. But that was based on the idea. Most of the ancient cultures, or the Dark Age cultures that would practice this, it would be coming up to at the end of the harvest home time, which ultimately Halloween is. That's the end of the growing season, the end of the season when you're collecting, you're harvesting and so forth. And so it's beginning of winter technically, even though in the modern world we don't tend to start winter until the end of December. Back then, beginning of November was considered to be pretty much the time when, if you'd got a summer goddess that provided things for the summer, and the Anglo-Saxons called her Estra, in the winter you'd got a god who pretty much took over, because it was the god of hunting, or Herne. Before the Saxons, you've got the Celts who had the god Cern, and in the summer they had a goddess whose name was Serasta or Andastre. We don't quite know what she was called, because the Romans tried to get rid of all mention of her. Anyway, less of that. So this fool thing, which was supposed to be beyond either of those gods of summer and winter and any other creature. So somebody would dress up around Halloween time. They would dress up as the fool, and there would be people would lead a procession through the town, something like they had in The Wicker Man. In fact, somewhere near where I live in Birmingham, you've got a place called Abbots Bromley, which is a village that still has one of these original festivals. They have it on Wakes Day, which is early September, but it's the same thing. Some of them had it during the harvest, some of them had it most of them tended to have it near a Halloween. And they have a character dressed as a fool. They have a man as a hobby horse. They have people dancing around with antlers and other figures, and a man dressed as a woman leading the procession, in the same way as Christopher Lee does in The Wicker Man. So, and the fool character, what they do is they don't burn the fool anymore. And they don't actually have a bonfire, I don't think, no, they don't have as Bromley. But other people, like down in Cornwall, there's a place that still does something called Smoking the Fool, and they go through the town as a guy who's got a job of dressing up in this weird costume, and he wears a hat on his head with flames and smoke coming out of it, and they smoke him. In other words, he has to go through smoke and flames in order to be. I mean, he doesn't get hurt now. There's lots of regulations and health and safety going on, so he doesn't get hurt. But the original idea was somebody volunteered to do all these trials in order to, as the fool, in order to appease the fool in some way. Anyway, the basic idea was that the fool would be sacrificed, but it's not the actual person like in The Wicker Man. What they would do, somebody was dressed as the fool, and at the end of the processions and the merrymaking, that person would be allowed to do what they liked all day. Fool, as they say in The Wicker Man, king for a day. So this person would be able to do what they want to do for a whole day, and at the end of it, an effigy of the fool would be burned. Some people say, going back earlier, there was actual human sacrifices. The Romans certainly said that the Celts did it, but the Romans said horrible things about everybody. I wouldn't take too much notice of what they said about Celtic practices. They claimed that Druids did all sorts of things, like eating babies. So I really doubt that we can take too much notice of that. But anyway, this fool effigy was burned, and somebody would play the part of the fool. And in many places where things didn't go too well, and they're having bad luck at other times of the year, there may be called a Fool's Day, where somebody could start dancing around and doing what they wanted to all day, and then they'd burn an effigy. They sometimes in Britain had it at the beginning of April, hence where we get April Fool's Day. They basically wanted to make sure that the fool was kind of out the way. So he starts kind of in the beginning of autumn, halfway through autumn, maybe the beginning of winter, and his time is up on Fool's Day, which is the 1st of April. I don't know if it still goes on, but the idea was until midday, people played tricks on each other. We certainly did when I was a kid. I remember the news stations used to do it. And one time they actually had a whole news broadcast on the BBC about the harvest of the spaghetti plantations in Italy. And people were harvesting spaghetti off the trees. Of course, it was a joke, but it was an April Fool's joke. They even did another one, which was called... what was it? Alternative 5, I think it was. It was a joke documentary that was put on, I think it was BBC, in about 1973 or something. And they claimed that there was aliens had been found on Mars, and scientists were being snuck off the Earth secretly to go and investigate them and all that kind of thing. And I remember people were coming into my office the next day saying, where I worked at the time, saying, oh my God, the aliens are coming, they're going to get invaded, we're going to have to all go and live on Mars. And I said, that was a joke, wasn't it? And they said, no, it wasn't. I said, well, what day was yesterday? So, well, April the 1st. Anyway, that's the kind of thing that went on. But going back in time, what would happen is that people would play jokes. The normal rule of law and order would be suspended to a certain degree, and people would run a bit riot. It would be the Fool's Day. It would celebrate the fool, and that the idea was to kind of basically make sure that he was contained for the summertime. But anyway, one of the interesting things that the fool turned into in Western law, particularly in England, is he became Mr. Punch. Now, he's a really weird character altogether. Mr. Punch, he starts off as part of pantomime in Italy as Punchinello. He's an unpleasant character, and he's got this long nose and this funny chin and this hat, and he dresses like a jester or a trickster or a joker. But in this country, he became much more popular, and he sort of took over from the traditional character of the fool. And so, if you remember again seeing the Wicker Man, the fool character that Edward Woodward is dressed up as is like exactly the same as Mr. Punch. They even say that he's sometimes called Mr. Punch. Well, that's a later development, but it was certainly going on a few hundred years ago, where people were dressing up as this Punch figure around Halloween, and also on the Fool's Day of the beginning of April. So, okay, you've got this Mr. Punch character who would dress up like this, and he would have a day of where he was in charge, a day of misrule, and at the end of it, they would burn an effigy of him. The mask that he wore would then be put on a dummy, and the dummy be burnt to get rid of his mischief. Okay, so, but then the character became really popular with kids. They started doing these Punch and Judy shows. I think they go back to the 1700s, but they were certainly really popular in Victorian times. But when you think about Mr. Punch and the story behind him, what he does, I think they've changed it a lot now. I saw a Punch and Judy show not too long ago. But Mr. Punch, basically, the story is, I mean, he's this hideous character and speaks like this horrible voice like this. He keeps murdering people. He basically, but including a baby. He throws this baby around that they've got with his wife, Judy, and they throw this baby around. The baby gets killed. There's other characters that come and investigate what's happened, like a policeman who also gets killed, and Punch puts him into a mincer and turns him into sausages. There's all sorts of people that turn up. The local mayor gets involved. He's going to hang Punch, and Punch hangs him instead, turns him into sausages. He's constantly fighting with his wife, Judy, beating her up with a stick. And he's an absolutely hideous character. But I remember as a kid sitting on the seashore when they had them on the beach, doing Punch and Judy shows, clapping and cheering and all that sort of thing. Oh, and he'd go, that's the way to do it. That's the way to do it. Well, everyone, I mean, it's not quite like that anymore, but he comes from this fool, this misrule character. Now, what I find interesting is I have investigated over the years various cases where something like this fool or Lord of Misrule is being blamed for hauntings in a house. Now, there was one I can think of going back. I won't name any actual names, but those who have read some of the books about the Green Stone and the Eye of Fire will probably know what I'm talking about. And what happened is that this house started to have all sorts of weird things going on in it. People would hear weird noises across the back. It was like a cottage in the middle of nowhere in the countryside in England. And there would be a strange mist that very often came at the end of the garden. And sometimes in this mist, people would see these shadowy figures moving around. And so ultimately, they brought in some people to try and do a kind of exorcism, to try and cleanse the house. It wasn't a priest, but people came who had, burnt sage, that kind of thing, to get rid of whatever this was. And it just made matters worse. Ultimately, they got somebody to go off into a trance, a medium, to see what they could say about what was going on. And this person was possessed by somebody who claimed to be the fool, Mr. Punch. Oh, that's the way to do it. Spoke in that really weird voice that he does. Incidentally, when they did that on the Punch and Judy shows, with the puppets, they'd have to put this thing at the back of their mouths to do it. And they're bands now. They don't have it anymore. They don't have that same Punch voice. They have to kind of talk like this rather than have that thing that makes them sound really weird, because too many people were swallowing it and then ended up speaking like him, presumably forever. Oh my God, or choking to death. Anyway, it's no laughing matter. So this person would go off into this sort of trance-like state as Mr. Punch and say, oh, you've got to sort of, you've got to beat me at certain games and things if you want me to leave this premises. Ultimately, they ended up doing a Ouija board in which Punch would ask them riddles on the board, and they'd have to answer them. Until they actually answered these riddles, this haunting got worse. Now, that's bizarre, I know, but you'd say, yeah, but it's just somebody messing around, isn't it? Yeah, of course, possibly. But the haunting did seem to stop when they answered his riddles correctly. But while this was going on, this particular person had a flat built on the back of the cottage, which was a granny flat where their grandmother lived. And this old lady who lived in the place was like 80 or whatever it is. She's quite old, even older than I am now. And she was, just an ordinary old lady. But then one time when somebody was going off as this Mr. Punch and said, look, apparently every time they came into the place, they'd seem to get almost possessed like him. They said, no, we're not doing this anymore. And then it spelt on the Ouija board, well, if I'm not going to be able to speak through that person, I'll speak through your granny round the back. And then suddenly this woman who didn't know anything about what was going on in the kind of flat next door sort of thing, suddenly started going, oh, so I can talk to you, can I? And it really, I'm not making it sound funny, but it was scary. And there was about 10 or 12 of us witnessed all this. She came out and she was just a normal old lady, but she started telling us things about, right, you've got to beat me at this riddles that I'm going to set you and all that. And as far as I know, she could have known nothing about this. Okay, maybe she heard it, but this was a frail old lady. She wasn't well. And she was speaking in this. She was wandering around strong and fit, and speaking just like the Mr. Punch speaks, with that thing that's down his throat. Another occasion, there was a friend of mine who was going back at that time. We had a magazine called Strange Phenomena, and we investigated the paranormal, and we had a group called Parasearch that was doing this stuff. Now, one of the people who was in this Parasearch group, I won't name any names because these people may be living sensible, straightforward lives now. But this guy worked. Now, at this point, I'd moved to living in Coventry, and which is, for those who are not from England, that's not far from the centre of England, not far from Stratford-upon-Avon, where Shakespeare lived. So I'm in Coventry, and this guy used to work for a newspaper in Birmingham, and he used to get the train from Coventry to Birmingham every day. It's about 15 miles. Now, on one particular occasion, this guy had come along to one of these events where this Mr. Punch thing was coming through. He didn't believe it. He wanted to see it for himself. But while he was there, he seemed to have got possessed by this Mr. Punch character. And he was going, right, I'm going to tell you what the story is today. What you've got to solve are the following riddles. And I used to just sit there kind of thinking, how come they can't all be collaborating on this? It's just too weird. Ultimately, this guy, he used to sometimes when his wife was with him, his girlfriend at the time, when his girlfriend was with him, he'd suddenly start going off saying, tell everyone to get together. We've got to have another meeting in the house, in the haunted house, as he called it. And then he'd say, what's happened? And then I remember that woman came to me and said, I don't want you involving my boyfriend in this stuff anymore. You're destroying him. He's going mental. Stop it. And I said, nothing to do with me. Okay, fine. And so he said to her, right, I'm not going to do it anymore. Now, one time I wasn't present, but I was told that at this haunted house, these people are sitting around doing this seance. And then during this seance, what happens is that it spells out that it's the fool, it's Mr. Punch, it wants to come through. And it said, and they said, well, no, he can't. We haven't got anybody who can go off as him. Yeah, but this guy could. Well, he doesn't want to do it anymore. He says, well, I'm going to stop that, all right. At exactly that time, evidently, again, I can't verify for all of it, but the people who spoke to me, I can trust what they said. So it seemed likely. At the time that this was happening, this seance, this guy was at a party somewhere in Birmingham, and he was sitting there just, chatting away. And then suddenly, and he told me this later, he had been taking various substances, I believe. He certainly was drunk, and he claimed that somebody gave him some strange liquid to drink. Anyway, he was out of his face. So he wasn't normal. But he says he remembers seeing the door open, and what happened was somebody came through the door towards him, literally looking like Punch, like the mask and everything, and dressed in all the kind of jester outfit, literally coming towards him. And if people who were with him at the time turned around and said, I saw him sitting there saying, no, not now, Mr. Punch, not now, not now. And it took him over when he was out of his face. Anyway, so then his girlfriend had said to me, what are you doing to him? You sent him back. I said, I have no idea. Afterwards, I found out about these people supposed to be having this seance at the same time as this happened. Anyway, after this, he said, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not doing it. And the Ouija board had spoken out on the next time they all met together and said that if this guy isn't going to go off as Mr. Punch, I'll make sure he looks and sounds like me for the rest of his life. And we thought, what the hell does that mean? I was there when that one came out, and I said, no idea what it means. Then one day I used to work at the Belgrade Theatre in Coventry, doing some publicity sometimes. Sometimes I helped out behind the bar, and I used to drink in there at a great wine bar. So I was in this, sitting in the wine bar area of the Belgrade Theatre in Coventry one night, and suddenly I saw this guy come in. And he kind of walked towards me, and his face had this great big chin out, and his nose was weird. He literally looked like Mr. Punch. I thought, what the hell has happened to him? And he started to walk towards me, going back. Apparently, what had happened to him, he was sitting on a train, just waiting to pull out of Birmingham New Street Station, and he had one of these like old biro things. And they used to have like the top of the biro would come off. We didn't have them anymore. A bit biro, the top would come off, and now they have like a hole in them. So if you get them stuck in your throat, you can still breathe. They didn't used to have that. And he was chewing his pen while waiting at the station, and suddenly the train did this, and apparently this top of the pen went back down his throat, and he couldn't breathe, and he was going to go and he was standing, he stood up, he said, and he's looking around at all these other people on the train who are just thinking, what the hell's wrong with this guy? And he's kind of going, and then he knew that no one was going to help him. He couldn't be helped. He couldn't talk. And he put his fingers down his throat, and he just felt the bit of this pen right just in the tip of his fingers, and he couldn't reach it. And he thought, if he doesn't get to this and pull it out, he's going to die. And he managed somehow to dislocate his own jaw in complete panic, put his hand down his throat, and pull this pen out. Now, the people who are around him were looking and thinking, what the fuck? Suddenly this guy stands up and he's going, pointing to his throat, dislocates his own jaw, and sticks his fist down his throat. I mean, I don't think he ever went back on that train again afterwards. But so when he comes to see me, this is what happened. His jaw, I think he'd been to the doctors already. This must have been a day or so later when I saw him, because he had something around his neck as well. Well, I don't know. He had all this stuff, but his jaw was like this. And when he came up to me, he said, well, I want to tell you something. He had damaged his voice box. So he did sound like Mr. Punch, and his face looked like him. I'm telling you, that was pretty weird stuff, because that is what the Ouija board said. Anyway, I could tell you loads of more weird stuff about Mr. Punch and what he might be, and chaos magic and things that seem to be able to summon him up. But that's all for another time. It's just kind of just weird. Whatever this creature is, it does seem to exist in some kind of capacity. And if you sort of get yourself in a situation of when you're in a certain place at a certain time with certain things going on, maybe it can affect you. I have no idea. But all I can say is I've seen things that make me think that this thing might. I can understand why people in the past might have thought that this could bring them bad luck. And so consequently, what used to happen is that when it got round to Halloween time, they would have somebody dressed up as this fool. He would go around, he'd act foolish, do whatever he wanted. And at the end of the day, the mask would be put on a dummy, and that would be burned. The church started getting, over the years, throughout the Middle Ages, many places the church said, you can't do this anymore, you can't do it. It survives in certain places throughout the country, some of these old pagan things, traditions. But what happened is that ultimately so many people some of the other pagan traditions were fading out, that this burning of the fool thing kept happening. So in 1605, after the gunpowder plot, when Guy Fawkes tried to blow up Parliament, and he was hanged, drawn, and quarters, he wasn't thrown on a bonfire, even though I knew somebody who actually thought he was. There was this girl I used to know who claimed that she knew all about history, and she couldn't believe that I could have a book published about history because I hadn't got a driving license. I mean, actually, I did have a driving license, but what had that got to do with history? And she said, I said to her, what's that got to do with history? She said, so you can get there. I said, what? It's a history? Yeah, like castles and shit. And she thought, she taught once, when I was talking to some people about the gunpowder plot, she came in and butted in like, oh, I know all about that. And these people from America were asking her, well, explain what it is then. And she says, well, there was this gunflower pot, right? And it was like, this Guy Fawkes, right? And he used to wear like a pointy hat, and he tried to blow up the king or something. But the police, they caught him just in time and bunged him on a bonfire. Well, that actually didn't happen. He was hanged, drawn, and quartered, which is actually worse, in my opinion. But then again, that's it. So this Guy Fawkes is caught. And after this, over the years that followed, the government of England, Protestant government of James I, wanted to try and discredit Catholics and make people feel that these people who have been Catholics trying to blow up the Kingdom Parliament can't be trusted. So let's remember this by burning an effigy of Guy Fawkes every year, even though that Guy Fawkes himself wasn't the main part of the plot. He was just one who was caught trying to light the fuses. The person who actually was in charge of the plot was a man called Robert Catesby. But that's another story. Okay, so you get this situation where the people are already burning a fool on Halloween, but it just so happens that the gunpowder plot took place and they caught Guy Fawkes on a few days later on November the 5th. So they said, well, you can still, a lot of local parishes said, you can still do your pagan thing, but just do it a few days later. And it was burning the fool on the 5th of November, and all the fireworks and everything very quickly became the burning of this really, well, you know what the sort of Guy Fawkes mask looks like, a bit like the fool. It certainly was exactly like the fool in the past. It's now the one that's associated with the anonymous group and stuff. But the fool mask, burning the fool, became the burning of Guy Fawkes, and that's why we still have it in this country. So anyway, I just thought I'd talk about this because Halloween's coming up, and I've been rattling on there for half an hour, so I shall bid you all farewell. I don't suppose many people have been watching, but anyway, I shall leave this on YouTube, for anyone to watch at their convenience. And may I wish you a very happy Halloween and gunpowder plot. Bye for now.